SpaceX passes critical environmental review to develop another Falcon launch site in California while also being approved for a massive ramp-up in cadence. Axiom changes its CEO for a second time in just 6 months. China launches its Kerbal-esque rocket yet again, and NASA's Orion spacecraft has finally met its SLS rocket for Artemis II. As always, we'll have all that and more coming up this week in Spaceflight. This week we got a few major development updates from a number of space companies from around the world. So let's get to it. Relativity Space continues to make steady progress on its Terran R vehicle and its supporting infrastructure. In Long Beach, the thrust structure for the first Terran R flight has completed its lengthy acceptance testing campaign. These tests prove that the structure can withstand 16.5 meganewtons of force, which was applied through the test stand's hold-down clamps, the same ones that will later secure the stage to the stand during static fire testing. While that structure has now moved on to integration, work on another thrust structure for the second flight has already begun. Meanwhile, assembly and integration of the second Eon-R engine for flight has now been completed at Long Beach, and work has already begun on igniter components for a future version of the engine. Over at NASA's Stennis Space Center in Mississippi, acceptance testing of the first Eon-R engine for flight has also begun on the test stand. Over the past month, there's been a lot of focus on the second stage of the vehicle, including the Eon-V vacuum engine, which will power it to orbit. Development testing of this engine included a 475-second hot fire test, matching the full burn that the upper stage will perform in space. There's also a lot of visible progress on flight hardware for Terran R's maiden voyage, with primary structure tanks now painted and 3 circumferential friction stir welds now complete on the first stage tank. That visible progress additionally continues at the Cape, where the steel frame of the horizontal integration facility has been completed and side panels are already being mounted. Piling has also begun for the 2 lightning towers at the launch pad, which will each stand around 161 meters tall. Furthermore, 2 liquid oxygen tanks are now in position as the tank farm also begins to take shape. With all of these pieces coming together for both Terran R and the infrastructure at Launch Complex 16, it won't be long before we shift our attention from construction to countdown. Make sure you don't miss out on any future updates by giving us a like and ringing that bell. It's free and it alerts you of future videos and live streams from our channel. And speaking of companies painting their structures, VAST has also applied a fresh-looking coat of paint to its Haven 1 flight article this week. The company will next integrate the hatch and the domed observation window before sending its single-module space station off to Mojave in California to undergo a round of pressure and load testing. Now, if you think you're seeing double, that's because this image shows the primary structures for both the qualification and the flight article at VAST headquarters in Long Beach. Haven 1 is currently set to launch atop a Falcon 9 no earlier than May of next year. VAST CEO Max Haut seems certain that this approach will quickly lead the company to multi-module stations and prevent a gap in US presence in low Earth orbit. We'll definitely continue to follow that journey, and we hope for the best. There's another contender on the path to becoming the world's first private space station, and that's Axiom Space. But VAST and Axiom are taking different paths and timelines to get there. While VAST may reach orbit first with its small self-contained station, Axiom's first module will initially attach to the International Space Station. Later this decade, it will detach to become the core of Axiom Station, a fully independent orbital outpost and likely the first commercial station to be continuously crewed. And this week, Axiom has a new captain at the helm, again. Just 6 months after naming Tejpal Bhatia as CEO, the Houston-based company has just appointed Dr. Jonathan Certain to lead the next phase of its space station plans. Certain, a physicist and aerospace veteran, became Axiom's president in May and will now take on both roles. His technical background could prove to be key as the company transitions from sending private crews to the ISS, like June's Ax-4 mission, to launching and assembling modules for its own station in low Earth orbit. It's been a busy few months for Axiom, with new research partnerships, a growing science division, and increasing international collaboration. The company is expanding fast. So while the quick leadership change might raise eyebrows, Axiom says that it's all about focus and momentum, keeping the development of its commercial space station project firmly on course. Let's hope this is true and all goes smoothly for Axiom in the near future. Another company with a big development update this week was Spanish rocket company PLD Space. In a nearly 19-minute-long video, PLD Space outlined some of the major developments and work that's been accomplished in the last few months for its Miura 5 orbital rocket. This included finalizing the rocket's design, carrying out testing of its guidance, navigation, and control software for the first flight, as well as manufacturing the avionics for the first flight vehicle. The company's been busy building qualification tanks for both first and second stages and integrating them at the company's headquarters in Elche. Some of these tanks have then undergone structural and burst testing at its test site in Teruel. This production and testing has also been performed in parallel to engine development and testing. PLD has started manufacturing full TEPREL-C engines and has even already fired up a TEPREL-C vacuum-optimized version on the test stand. They've also shown testing of the valves and gas generators that will be used on these engines, as well as some of the components being manufactured at the company's own production facility. At the same time, PLD says that it's completed the critical design review of the launch pad systems and has begun civil works at the Guyana Space Center, where the rocket will debut. Additionally, they're already well underway manufacturing the rocket's transporter erector. So if all goes well, PLD may have a chance at flying Miura 5 for the first time next year, but everything still needs to go smoothly for that to happen. Blue Origin continues to prepare New Glenn for its second launch. Following the rollout of the booster to the pad this week, CEO Dave Limp shared a video showing integration of the first and second stages ahead of pre-launch static fire testing. In the days following, it's presumed that both stages were then lifted and integrated with the rocket's transporter erector inside of the hangar, but that operation may not have been super smooth. Reports by Ars Technica reporter Eric Berger confirmed that the rocket suffered minor damage to its second stage during some of this integration work. But according to Berger, this damage isn't expected to significantly change the timeline, and that a date no earlier than November 9th might still be reasonable for this second flight of New Glenn. Hopefully, Blue will release some information about a few of the upcoming milestones, like rollout of the rocket to the pad and the extent of the testing planned while it's there. And yes, we do think that a static fire is in the plans, but they could be thinking of performing other tests as well. In the meantime, Blue Origin is also preparing for the third flight of New Glenn, which is expected to carry the company's Blue Moon Mark 1 lander. This week, the company announced that it's close to completing training simulations for that mission, having run end-to-end high-fidelity simulations of the mission phases over the last month. The company also showed pictures of its Lunar Mission Control Center in Washington State, from where these Blue Moon missions will be controlled. It may take a bit longer than they planned, but this mission still has a chance of taking place next year, so it's great to see that they're already prepping for it. And speaking of lunar landers, this week we got quite an announcement from Impulse Space. Headed by former SpaceX Chief of Propulsion Tom Mueller, the company's goals are centered around space mobility and cargo delivery. So far, Impulse has built and launched 2 of its Miura low Earth orbit spacecraft, which also act as tugs. It's currently developing the high-energy methane-fueled Helios stage, which is meant to be used for missions to geosynchronous orbit and beyond, with a capability of carrying about 4 metric tons to geo. This week, Impulse Space announced the addition of another transport spacecraft to its fleet, a lunar lander. The company joins in the long list of companies developing their own lunar landers, but unlike the others, Impulse says that this one fits into a critical gap in the medium-sized cargo delivery range. There are several small landers with under 1 metric ton capability to the lunar surface, and 2 landers, Blue Moon Mark II and Starship, which are in the dozens of tons of cargo to the lunar surface range. Currently, only a few landers fit in the middle of that gap, such as Astrobotic's Griffin lander or Blue Origin's Mark 1 lander. Impulse's lander, combined with the Helios upper stage, could launch on any high-end medium-lift or heavy-lift launch vehicle and deliver up to 3 metric tons of cargo to the lunar surface. Not only did they think that this gap can be filled by this new lander, but they also think that they can accomplish it rather quickly. It draws on previous propulsion experience used on the Miura spacecraft, and it uses the Helios tug set to debut next year. By doing it this way, they argue that it could play a critical role in the sustainable return of humans to the moon this decade. The plan is to carry out 2 of these lunar missions in 2028, so we'll see whether the challenging timelines can be met or not. We recently had a few updates on engine testing, so let's also take a look at some of those as well. The Russian space agency Roscosmos has fired up the first stage of its new Soyuz 5 vehicle ahead of its debut flight. Soyuz rockets have been the workhorse of spaceflight for over 6 decades, derived from the R-7 missile of the 1950s and first flying in 1966. Since then, over 1,900 Soyuz vehicles have launched, carrying satellites, cargo, and crew to space. The medium-lift Soyuz 5 is planned to make its debut in the near future, simplifying production, reducing costs, and increasing the payload capacity to low Earth orbit to 17 tons. The rocket carries the Soyuz name, but it's nothing like it. It's powered by the RD-171MV engine, a modernized version of the same four-chamber RD-170 engine that powered the Zenit rockets in the 1980s, which this new design will replace. The engine burns the same liquid kerosene and oxygen as propellants and generates a thrust of 800 metric tons. This ground testing campaign ran successfully for 160 seconds, which is a typical mission burn length for this first stage. Having passed this ground qualification, the stage will now be moved to the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan for integration testing. The upper stage of the vehicle is still being assembled and tested, so we'll see if the Soyuz 5 can still make its debut before the end of the year, or if it slips into early 2026. Chinese company Deep Blue is gearing up for the debut of its upcoming Nebula 1 rocket while also preparing for future rockets. Back in late September, the company performed a 308-second-long test firing of the rocket's second stage, firing the rocket's Thunder R vacuum-optimized engine for the duration that it would see during flight. However, Deep Blue is already undergoing design work on a more powerful Nebula 2 rocket, which will be using the upgraded Thunder RS engine. This week, Deep Blue completed a 20-second test firing of the engine, which has a thrust of roughly 1,300 kilonewtons. The engine, fueled by kerosene, uses a gas generator cycle, which, as expected, led to quite a lot of soot in its exhaust. What was definitely not expected was how much visible fire you can see around the engine while it was operating, and just how much longer that fire was present in the nozzle after shutdown. This test definitely doesn't look great visually, but perhaps from a data standpoint, it was a lot more successful? This week, the Department of the Air Force released the final environmental impact statement authorizing changes to SpaceX's Falcon launch program from the Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. Now, this process has been underway for quite some time, and it relates to SpaceX's takeover of the historic Space Launch Complex 6 at Vandenberg. In fact, it's been underway for so long that we covered it in one of our first episodes way back in 2023. This final review was also released alongside a record of decision authorizing SpaceX to several things. Now, first of all, SpaceX can now develop Slick 6 into a Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy launch site. This will include the construction of a brand new hangar for rocket integration, a transporter erector and rail system, and a new launch mount where the old Delta IV launch crown was located. The review also clears SpaceX to begin demolition of legacy structures such as the mobile assembly shelter and the mobile service tower. It'll also see the removal of the old hydrogen tank farm, the establishment of a new kerosene tank farm, and an upgrade of the existing liquid oxygen tank farm. 2 new landing zones will be built south of the complex, which will enable dual Falcon Heavy landings at the site, whenever that happens. Critically, this review also clears SpaceX to increase its launch cadence across both of the company's launch sites at Vandenberg from 50 a year to 100 a year. Now, it's highly unlikely that Falcon Heavy launches will be needed from Vandenberg anytime soon, but SpaceX needs to reserve that option in the event that the US military needs that capability. However, Slick 6 could still be useful for SpaceX launches of its Starlink constellation. I mean, the whole reason that SpaceX is even thinking about launching 100 times a year from California is because of the tremendous ramp-up in cadence in recent years thanks to Starlink. While Vandenberg is known more for its polar and high-inclination launches, it can still be used to launch into mid-inclination orbits if the rocket flies parallel to Baja California, and that's exactly what the majority of Starlink missions do when launched from there. So with Slick 6 work hopefully starting soon, we may see another bump in Falcon's cadence in a year or two, thanks to this site alone. Now we'll take a look at some other stories across space, starting from China at the Zhuquan Satellite Launch Center, where Landspace has moved its ZhuQue 3 rocket to the launch pad. We're not expecting its maiden launch until November, but this could be the actual first and second stages for that first flight out there on the pad, carrying out pre-launch testing. You may recall we had already seen a static fire test of a ZhuQue 3 first stage booster back in June when all 9 Tianque 12A engines burned for 45 seconds. That test verified startup, shutdown, and engine gimbaling, as well as tank pressurization with the stage fully loaded with propellant. But that test used a development version of the booster instead of a flight article. Like Starship, ZhuQue 3 is constructed of stainless steel and is designed to be partially reusable. So the vehicle that is rolled out now carries 4 landing legs which are visible at its base. Unfortunately, all we've got at this time are pictures from Chinese social media, so not the best quality. The reason why it went out with landing legs is because the company is still planning to attempt a landing and a recovery of that stage on its very first flight. This is quite the daring attempt, but Landspace already successfully flew and landed its ZhuQue 3 prototype in the Gobi Desert in September of last year. The 10-kilometer vertical takeoff and vertical landing test verified engine restarts in flight, as well as precision landing. Now, at least the second stage side of things will be better known ahead of flight. The rocket's upper stage will use the same vacuum-optimized Tianche 15A engines that currently flies on the company's ZhuQue 2E. But it didn't really have a great time on its last mission in August. An electrical arc discharge caused attitude instability and the loss of gimbal control on that engine, triggering the flight termination system and ending the mission prematurely. This delayed the final preparations for the ZhuQue 3 while the issue was investigated. With hardware now at the pad, things are looking much more promising for an eventual maiden flight next month. Satellite developer Planet Labs has revealed its next-generation imaging satellites called Owls. Now, these are not to be confused with familiar-sounding mission names that were launched recently on Rocket Lab's Electron. Those missions use the Owl name in their titles, but are for a different kind of Earth observation satellite that uses radar for its Japanese customer Synspective. Planet Lab's Owl series is set to build on its current fleet of around 200 Super Dove satellites, offering faster and higher resolution imagery and an improved revisit rate. Whereas Super Doves offer 3 to 5 meter resolution, the company says that the new satellites will provide 1 meter class panchromatic and multispectral images with very low latency. This means its customers, from businesses to governments, will be able to access fresh, high-quality images of Earth quicker than ever before, with updates provided on a daily basis. The new design is flexible, so Planet can swap or adjust cameras and sensors to suit different types of missions. Owl satellites will use the same core imaging bands as Planet Super Doves, but with upgraded avionics systems and built-in AI using NVIDIA processors. These wise owls will be trained on models such as Google's Gemini and Anthropic's Claude to sort and flag images before sending them to Earth, cutting down the amount of raw data that needs to be transmitted. Planet Labs owls are currently in development with a technical demonstration planned in late 2026, so we'll be keeping a beady eye on this story as it develops. The European Space Agency has selected an Italian aerospace company to build a recovery vessel for landing and recovering future rocket stages. Ingegneria dei Sistemi will design the vessel as part of a wider €40 million contract between the Space Agency and Italian rocket builder Avio, awarded last month. The proposed seaborne platform forms part of the ground infrastructure planning within Avio's contract. The vessel would be uncrewed, much like SpaceX's fleet of drone ships, with a robust landing deck and the ability to perform station keeping. The wider project includes the design of a reusable upper stage, which we covered in a previous episode. Avio developed Europe's Vega rocket series and the P-120C solid rocket boosters that currently power the Ariane 6 and may also form the first stage for this proposed new vehicle. The 2-year contract is limited to the preliminary design and technology definition, and the demonstrator vehicle is expected to draw on Avio's ongoing development work with its MR-10 engine. Like Ariane Group's reusable Prometheus engine, the MR-10 burns liquid methane and oxygen and will power the upper stage of the forthcoming Vega E rocket. Europe is taking steps towards reusable launch systems, with its first stage Themis demonstrator recently shipped to the S-Range Space Center in Sweden for further testing. With its legs installed, Themis is now awaiting a wet dress rehearsal ahead of its first flight. We'll keep bringing you updates as Europe continues to move towards a future where its rockets can return and fly again. Just last night, NASA's Orion spacecraft rolled to NASA's Vehicle Assembly Building to meet with its SLS rocket ahead of Artemis II, the first human spaceflight around the moon since 1972. The roll took place after a multi-week stay at the Launch Abort System facility, where Orion was integrated with its Launch Abort system and underwent a series of checkouts and validation tests. SLS has been ready for Orion stacking for a few months, but for Artemis II, Orion has been the most critical and time-consuming component when it comes to launch readiness. Fortunately, those days are now behind us, as both spacecraft and rocket are soon to be mated ahead of the final pre-launch processing and testing. The fully stacked SLS is expected to roll out to the pad either very late this year or sometime in early January, and will undergo a series of pad tests and rehearsals ahead of a first launch opportunity of no earlier than February 5th. Now, unfortunately, with the current government shutdown, we're not sure how much footage or official information we'll get while these events take place in the coming days and weeks, but we'll keep our eyes and ears open to any new information as it becomes available. This week we had a nice spread of launches worldwide between China, the United States, and New Zealand. From China, we had the second launch of the Gravity 1 rocket from the Dongfang-Hong Tiangong barge off the coast of Haiyang. Gravity 1 is an all-solid fueled medium-lift rocket by Chinese company Orion Space and has prompted all kinds of comparisons with the rockets of Kerbal Space Program, you know, the ones with the little green men, when it debuted last year. But don't be confused, despite its comical appearance and design, this is quite a powerful rocket and is currently the most powerful all-solid fueled rocket in the world. This week, China also launched yet another batch of its Guowang low Earth orbit internet satellites, but once again, only a few of them at a time, and with the Changzheng 8A rocket. This rocket has now launched 4 times, and all of them have carried these Chinese internet satellites. Ironically, this launch, as mundane as it might have seemed, was also the 600th launch of the Changzheng family of rockets. Since these have been launching since 1970, that turns out to be an average of about 11 launches per year, so not a whole lot, but still noteworthy. Now, of course, the star of the week was Starship, and here at NSF, we already reviewed everything about it on our most recent episode of Starbase Update, released a few days ago, so you should head over there and watch it if you want more in-depth coverage. But since that episode came out, we got treated to some extra amazing footage by SpaceX of the launch and landing of both the booster and the ship. The company showed a video of the booster's landing burn and hover from a buoy out in the Gulf, only to cut right before the expected self-disposing boom on impact with the water. They also did the same on a separate video of the ship's flip and landing from another buoy camera, this one in the Indian Ocean, of course. Now, look, don't get me wrong, the footage is amazing and it's almost otherworldly, but please, can we just see the boom from up close, please? Now, aside from Starship, we also had 3 launches of its smaller sibling, the Falcon 9. One of them was the third launch of Amazon's Kuiper satellites on a rocket which launched after several days of weather-related delays, and one of the other 2 was the second mission as part of the Space Development Agency's Tranche 1 transport layer of the agency's proliferated warfighter space architecture. This transport layer is essentially dedicated low Earth orbit, high-bandwidth, low-latency communication satellites for the military. So, like Starlink, but for the military. It's also not Starlink because these satellites are made by other companies, in this case by Lockheed Martin, but there are others involved. The remaining Falcon 9 launch was a Starlink mission, but it wasn't your ordinary Starlink launch. The mission broke the pad turnaround record for Space Launch Complex 40 and also broke the record for fastest integration to launch time at the company, according to SpaceX's Vice President of Launch, Kiko Donchev. The mission also saw the 500th Falcon 9 booster landing, which adds to the list of 500th anything that SpaceX has already carried out. Trust me, as complicated as it may be, we are keeping track of all of this stuff. And lastly, Rocket Lab also launched one of its Electron rockets from Mahia in New Zealand after a few-week hiatus from launching orbital Electrons. The mission, called Owl New World, was the 6th out of 21 for Earth observation company Synspective. Next week promises to be yet another busy one, with up to 5 Falcon 9 launches expected before our next space traffic report. One of these missions will be the next flight of Fleet Booster Leader B-1067, which will be flying for a 31st time on the Starlink Group 1017 mission. We'll also witness a rare occurrence, SpaceX expending a Falcon 9 booster. The SpainSat NG-2 mission, set for next week, will be using booster B-1076, and this will be its 22nd and last flight, as it needs the full performance of the first stage to reach its geosynchronous transfer orbit. Hopefully, if all goes well, we should also have the debut flight of Japan's HTVX cargo spacecraft to the International Space Station on board an H3 rocket. This will be the first flight of the H3 with the long fairing and 4 solid rocket boosters attached to the first stage. As you can imagine, we're also expecting some surprise Chinese launches to pop up into the schedule at some point in the week, but as usual, notices for those tend to appear a lot closer to launch, and we really don't get much information ahead of time. And as you know by now, you can always check out all of that and more by going to nextspaceflight.com or downloading the app on your phone so you don't miss the next spaceflight event. And that's your weekly update of spaceflight news. I'm Alicia Siegel for NSF, and we'll see you all again next week to recap this week in spaceflight.